Hello, barbecue enthusiasts. It is December 2018. Frankly, I had not planned on doing too many more videos related to smoking or barbecues unless it was kind of a vanity type thing at some point down the road. Hey, look what I'm doing today type thing. I did get a couple of requests, however, from viewers. Yes, I'm as astonished as you are that I have at least 2 viewers. I have no illusions. My videos are awful. So my hat's off to anyone with a high enough pain threshold to sit through any of my videos. But anyway, the long and the short of it is one of the viewers was interested in how long this pit in particular takes to get up to temperature. Another viewer had requested information on fire management, specifically to the Yoder smokers that I have, but I thought it wouldn't be any skin off my nose to go ahead and film while I'm doing some fire management on the other pits as well. So just to give anyone who might be thinking about buying one of these an idea of what they're in for. So I'd done a review on this smoker earlier this year. I'd been using it extensively. That particular review was spontaneous. I was already well into the cook by the time I decided, hey, I'll film some of this and let people know what I think about this pit. So I didn't really go through the innards or anything. There's really no need to, honestly. The manufacturer, Lone Star Grillz. This is a Lone Star Grillz 30 by 36 vertical offset. Lone Star Grillz does a great job of producing videos that cover all the features and details of their pits. If you go to their website, you can get that, but since I'm here, I'll go ahead and show you this real quick. I have the tuning plates removed in this right now. There's about a pitcher and a half of water in here. As I say, this is going to be kind of a 2-pronged video today. I'd actually filmed this fire management video last week while I was doing a cook, and it was, for one thing, a very foggy and cloudy day. Not that it probably mattered a whole lot, but you couldn't really tell what color the smoke was this is producing. As you can see, this is a tall pit, and the vents are quite a ways up there, and they're not, they don't have there's not much of a background based on the location and the height of the pit. So on a gray day, it's tough to see the quality of the smoke that this is producing. It's not even all that terribly easy on a day like today. I sometimes have to go into the house and have the pit against a dark hillside over here to be able to get a good idea what the quality of the smoke is looking like. But nonetheless, so that's one of the challenges with this particular pit. And as I say, where I have it located, it's up on a 2nd-story deck. So. And this is not an update to the review I'd done earlier, though I will make a little addendum here since I wasn't able to show. I think I forgot to point out a couple of features on the pit, and certainly didn't show anything inside because everything was already gone. As I say, the tuning plates have already been removed. I've got about a pitcher and a half of water in the bottom for today's cook. Based on the issues I had with my cook last week, I thought, I'm going to go back to square one as far as tuning the pit. Originally, when I purchased this pit, I followed the manufacturer's recommendations, setting up the tuning plates. The first one all the way to the right side here against the deflection plate or the firewall. The next one with about I believe it was a 1/4 to 3/8 inch gap, and then the other one with the next one with double that. What I did not do in the initial burn-in, which is probably what most people do, is adjust the tuning plates during the course of that burn-in. In my case, I didn't want to move them around before I'd had an opportunity to get some product on it to see if that had any effect on the temperatures. So it wasn't until after I did the first cook on this pit that I started adjusting the tuning plates. And I've kind of got some notes here starting, looks like middle of October last year when I started using this pit, and subsequent cooks. What I did was just progressively, per the manufacturer's recommendations, open up the gaps in the tuning plates further and further to the left. By the time I got to, and I'm missing some of my notes here, I'd misplaced this notebook last year and took notes on another pad. Now I've misplaced that pad, but I have this one. But the most recent cook, I had actually got things down to within 25 degrees across the pit and 50 degrees from the front right corner to the rear back corner. There's always been a pretty big temperature disparity there, but I actually got that down to about a 50-degree difference, which is acceptable as far as I'm concerned. But last week's cook didn't go anywhere near as well. So anyway, like I say, I thought I'd just go back to square one and just do absolutely nothing today but fiddle around with this. As far as tuning the pit today goes, I'm just going to dogmatically follow the manufacturer's directions and not implement any of my what I've found works with this pit, at least not till later. So, but the main thing about this video today is fire management. That's what I'm going to be focusing on. Hopefully it'll be a relatively short both video and relatively short time getting this thing tuned up. The 2 hours waiting for it to come up to temperature per the manufacturer's recommendations is going to be the worst part. So I think I pretty well covered the pit before. Just to recap, Lone Star Grillz have earned a reputation for excellent quality and excellent customer service. My experience is that reputation is very well earned. So it's the build quality of this is second to none, particularly among the pits that I have. One thing I think I may have forgotten to mention on the last video, and I haven't watched it recently, so I've kind of forgotten what's in there, but this does have the optional 1 1/4 inch ball valve. Of course, this is what's allowing me to fill it with water. So before I ever used this pit the very first time, I did run down to the hardware store and pick up galvanized nipple, 45, 8-inch nipple here, and then just a coupling to kind of finish that off and extend it a little bit. It's just been painted with stove paint so it matches the cooker. But the problem is getting anything up under here, especially if you have a large quantity of water or a lot of grease in the bottom of this thing, is getting a container large enough to contain all that underneath it. So this way it diverts everything down into a 5-gallon bucket. What I wish I had done before I assembled all this was to take this to a welder and have them tack weld a little piece of rod on here just so I could hang the bale of a bucket on here. So I have, when I don't need a large bucket underneath, I have something small I can hang underneath. As it is, I'll probably just pull this off at some time, put it on the drill press, drill a hole, stick a piece of rod in there with some JB weld, and it'll serve the same purpose, or take it to a welder. But if you do live in a cold climate or experience cold weather, and do expect this to clog up. This doesn't stay warm enough because of the extension. The grease starts to congeal in here and it finally clogs, so you got to drag out a heat gun or something of that nature to warm everything up enough to get it to dry out, so, or to drain out rather. I don't know if I mentioned it in the last video. My purpose for buying this pit, I have to be frank, part of it was out of curiosity. My other cookers are all horizontal offsets. I was kind of curious to see how a vertical offset would perform. I've inadvertently become a barbecue collector. My reason for purchasing this pit was as much out of curiosity as anything else. The other pits I have are horizontal offsets, and I have a large horizontal offset at this location. It's a little bit of a pain to use. It stays in the garage. I have to pull it out of the garage, obviously, to cook on it. And the location I like to put it in is not very level, so I've got to level the thing up every time I use it. So I wanted something with a little smaller footprint for smaller cooks when I'm just cooking for my wife and I, or maybe 1 or 2 guests. And something like this fit the bill. This sits on a deck, 2nd-story deck again, so space is kind of at a premium. But it's also a convenient location. I can see this area from both my kitchen and if I'm lounging on the couch watching TV while I'm cooking and that sort of thing. So it makes it a little nicer in that regard. It's whether it was worth the additional money for that kind of convenience is debatable, I suppose, but here we are. Ironically, this cooker actually has twice the capacity as the large cooker that I drag out of the garage. The drawback is that the spacing between the shelves, as you can see here, is fairly tight. It's about 4 inches, so if you're cooking taller meats, you generally have to remove 1 or more of the racks. And with this pit, so far, I've also experienced some uneven cooking temperatures. So, and I'm not here to critique this pit or anything else. I'm just this is just my observations. So, I'm a cook that likes to cook at a constant temperature. In fact, for purposes of this or any of my other videos, I don't utilize hot spots or anything of that nature. Typically, if I have a go-to temperature, it's 225. 225 is what I tend to target if I'm cooking ribs or chicken pieces. If I'm cooking brisket alone, I'll target 250. For poultry, chickens, whole chickens, halved, I always cut them in half. I'll target 250, turkeys 275, and chicken wings 350 degrees, just so I get a bite through skin on those. So I do use a number of target temperatures, but if I have have more than one product on the cooker at any time, it's going to be 225. So, and I like that temperature a lot across the whole pit, just so I don't have to rotate foods and try to keep track of hot spots and what's been cooked at a hotter temperature and what hasn't, where it's gotten shifted, that sort of thing, because I'm easily confused as it is. So, 3 things I've come to appreciate in a stick burner, and there are subsets to these as well probably, but I'm just going to cover the main aspects of it. One is ease of fire management. Hand in glove with that also comes the ability of the pit to cook at a desired temperature. And again, in my case, 225, 250, 275, 350, whatever it is, depending on what I'm cooking. I like to be able to maintain that temperature without wild temperature swings, particularly when you're managing the fire. So this pit is there's no problem in either of those regards. It performs as well as, if not better than, any of my other pits, excuse me, as far as that's concerned. The other thing is the ability to maintain a constant temperature across the pit. This particular pit falls a little bit short in that regard. It has some pretty good temperature differentials from the right side of the pit to the left side of the pit. I'm going to work on correcting that today. I had it dialed in pretty good, as I say, earlier this year. But it also has a pretty broad temperature differential from the right front corner of the pit to the left rear corner of the pit. We're all set up over here to get this thing lit off. I've got a bed of lump charcoal down there. It's just royal oak from Home Despot. Yeah, I said Despot. And got all my fire management tools set up here. When I ordered this pit, I ordered it with the optional ashtray, and on the initial burn-in realized that for me it's just about worthless because we are up on a deck here. The ashtray I either have to empty into a bucket, which makes a mess, or I've got to figure out how to get it down below without carrying the whole thing through the house, and I didn't want to do that. So I've just abandoned that, and this actually, this clean out tool, this scraper, and this poker were included with the pits. So, and this works very, very well for cleaning the thing out. I just push all at an angle when I clean this out. I just push the ash straight back, and it all falls through the grates. Once I get that cleaned up, I can pull the log grate out, and then just scrape everything into the bucket, and then just lower it down to the ground with a rope, so I don't even have to carry it through the house. That's just me. Again, it's going to vary from individual situation to individual situation. Something else on this cooker, especially for a longer cook, if you're doing ribs or chicken, something that's going to finish up fairly quickly, 6 hours or less, you probably won't need to do this, but for a longer cook, brisket, turkeys, that sort of thing, you're almost certainly going to have to at least level the ash in your firebox, if not clean some of it out, just to make sure you get good airflow under the grate there. So I don't know if we'll be on this long enough today to worry about that, but I just wanted to mention that. Also, the wood I'm using is Gamble oak. My understanding from the research I've done is that it's probably most closely related to white oak. It is a fairly dense wood, puts off some very good flavor, good heat. Rounds this size, this is probably too big for this smoker. It's certainly right on the cusp of being too big. And the rounds, they just don't ignite, and they just don't burn as quickly and thoroughly. They tend to smolder a little bit, so the splits work a little bit better. Very non-scientific, but they just don't seem to have an edge for the fire to catch. Some of the rounds are just slightly too large to burn as rounds. They just don't ignite well, so you have to split them, and then they end up too small as well. So it's real easy to end up with some splits that are a little smaller than I like to use. What you have to remember, you've got this small footprint here, and there's a lot going on in here. You've got a lot of your fire is right next to the hole of your cook chamber. It doesn't spread out like a horizontal, so you can't keep a very high fire in this thing without cooking at a high temperature. So if you're wanting to cook low and slow like me, it's you're constrained to having to keep a little lower coal bed, and consequently you're having to burn smaller splits. Typically 2 is enough, sometimes 3, and I'll show you as we progress through the cook today what you have to do to maintain your coal bed, and at least what I have to. It's again, individual results are going to vary. But I'll show you what you have to do sometimes to both maintain the fire temperature in the cooker you want and an adequate coal bed for the next round of splits. In an example of not practicing what I preach, it is a good idea to keep some little kindling wood on hand. I just happen to have this. I didn't create it purposely, but if you do get distracted or anything of that nature and you let your coal bed die down too much, it's helpful to have some of these around. Now, I'll say this again. This pit draws very well, and that lends itself to relatively easy fire management. Again, probably one of the easiest pits I have as far as fire management is concerned. Also cooks at a constant temperature. That is, it's easy to maintain the size of fire you want to maintain the temperature you want in the cook chamber. So those two items are not an issue on this pit. You can let the coal bed on this pit burn down quite low, and I'll try to mismanage the fire a little bit as this progresses, just so you can see how easy it is to recover if you do mess up a little bit. So what I like to do, I used to use a chimney or two of charcoal to get things going. And if you're a purist, there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that, but I cheat and use a weed burner, the old Texas match, since I happen to have one. And it's sure nice, especially when you're putting briskets on at 3 o'clock in the morning, that you don't have to get up that extra 20 minutes or 30 minutes earlier just to get a chimney or two of charcoal going. You can just light it right up with this thing. And honestly, it's not really a cheat. All of the stick burners that I have are plumbed for a log assist lighter. I've never gotten them on any of mine. I just didn't want the added complexity and one more thing that can burn out, that sort of thing. But if I were going to get one, this is the one pit I wish I had gotten it on, just so I didn't have to haul the propane tank and the lighter through the house from the garage every time I wanted to light this up. Talk about first world problems, huh? Okay, let's get her going. Okay, that's going to take off here. I've got the damper opened all the way up, and that's going to take off here pretty quickly. So I'll get this closed up, but before I do, if I didn't mention it before, one thing I'm going to do before I start tinkering with tuning the pit is bring it up to temperature with the tuning plates removed. I've never done that before, and it's a harmless experiment. I'm just kind of curious to see what kind of results that yields. Okay, so as you can see, we're roughly 20-25 minutes into bringing the pit up to temperature. I'm going to go ahead and close that damper down a little bit. We're already getting up to temperature in the cook chamber here. So as you can see, this pit heats up fairly quickly. The outside gauges on this, the gauges in the door that is, seem to run about 25 degrees cooler than what's actually taking place in the cook chamber. And that's true of my other pits too. That seems to be kind of a universal constant for whatever reason. And we're up to 200 on there, that thermometer, 200 there, 200 there. 275, 285 there, and 3 1/4 back there. Okay, so it's roughly 45 minutes later, and you can see I've choked this down a little bit. The temperatures have come up quite a bit. I haven't looked inside yet, but I imagine it's, yeah, we're about 225 there, 225 there. 275 in the center, just under 275, about 270, 300 in that corner, and 275 here. Again, this is with the tuning plates removed entirely, so that's actually quite a bit better than I expected. And of course, the pit hasn't stabilized yet. We've only been going for about 45 minutes here. Our coal bed is, all that charcoal is virtually gone. And so our coal bed is going to be comprised of essentially what's left of the sticks. Now I'm going to mention again, individual results will vary. And I can't stress this enough. There's absolutely no substitute for experience. You're not going to watch a couple of YouTube videos and be able to run your pit flawlessly. So there are so many variables involved: what kind of wood you're using, how well seasoned it is, another number of other issues. I'm going to let that burn down just a little bit more before I add another split. All right, time for a couple of splits. Coal bed is normally going to be just a little lower than this. That's just the way it is going to work, maintaining the temperatures in the pit that I like to cook at. But I'll grab a couple of splits here and throw them on. Generally what I do with the coals, particularly when I have a smaller coal bed, is I rake them towards the front of the pit, that is closer to the damper, so that the heat over those coals is flowing back over the wood and keeps it ignited a little bit better. Okay, I've got a couple of splits here. These are pretty typical of the size of splits that I use. Again, because I'm purchasing this wood much of the time and I'm not harvesting it myself, I kind of have to go with whatever length, unless I want to pull out a miter saw or something like that and try to cut these down to size, but it's just not worth the effort. So in order for these to fit the firebox well, I just put them in at a little bit of an angle. Now you're going to notice on this pit that I do not warm splits on top of the firebox. I find that unique to this pit, it's simply not necessary. This pit draws well enough that the splits typically ignite fairly quickly and burn fairly cleanly. I'm just going to leave that door cracked about like that. I'm going to open this damper up just a skosh again. We don't have this really set. Once you kind of get this dialed in for the day, it'll pretty much hum along without having to adjust the damper much at all. You can pretty much leave it where it's at. So, but I just leave this door cracked to get everything taken off. As you can see, it's taken off quickly. And this wood is fairly well seasoned. I've had it for a couple of years now, so. And we're at 1250. I'm going to go ahead and close this back up again. If I've closed this up too quickly, it's going to start to produce some cloudy smoke, and it's not a problem. You can just, if you need to, you can open up the damper a little bit or crack the door, get it burning cleanly again. Once it's nice and hot, you can shut it back up again. And over here, just out of curiosity, still 2 1/4 front and back there. That's rather amazing. 250 there, about 270 back there, and 250 here. I guess I should have taken the tuning plates out a lot sooner. This is probably about as close to the temperatures I wanted to cook without any fuss that I've ever gotten. Okay, so here we are about, I think about 35 minutes later. And temps are a little high in there. I wasn't paying much attention and let it get away from me a little bit, but I got 250, both front and back there, 3 1/4 in the center, and that's interesting, a little over 275 in the back and a little under 275 up here. And we're almost certainly ready for some more wood again. Yep. Okay, I'm gonna grab a couple more splits, roughly the same size as the ones we had before. One's a little smaller. Now, this pit, and I think probably because it does draw so well, and because it requires a relatively small fire to keep the pit at a cooler temperature like I like to cook at, again about 225 typically, I have to feed it quite a bit more frequently. I shouldn't say quite a bit more frequently, but it requires wood about every 30 to 35 minutes. And I generally don't let the fire die down and let the pit temperature start to fall. I don't like large temperature swings, so I like to stay a little bit ahead of it. I have kind of an internal clock now in all my pits. I have a pretty good idea when they're going to require fresh splits, and I think that that's something you develop once you get a little bit of experience with your cookers. So those have lit real well. I think we're about there. Okay. Coming up on 2 hours, so I'm going to start tuning this thing here pretty quick. Not time to add smoke yet, or excuse me, not time to add wood yet. Probably. But I did choke this down a little bit to try to get the temperatures down, and it's starting to smolder a little bit. And one thing you can do when you're getting incomplete combustion is just give your logs, your splits, a flip. That'll get those burning clean again real quick. And another 10 or 15 minutes I'll need to throw a couple more splits in, but that's going to keep it clean and burning clean until then. Yeah, still a little warmer than I'd like. 250 on these two over here, 350 in the center, 275 in the left rear corner, and 250 there. Very interesting how the temperatures have turned out without the tuning plates in. But as I say, we've been going 2 hours, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this out, and the lower rack, that is, and install the tuning plates. Something else worth noting on this cooker, and this is something that should be obvious, but since I'm such a dunce, it didn't occur to me the first time I did a rib roast on this. There's no question where the heat is coming from on this. It's coming from below. So my horizontal offsets, generally the heat comes from below, but it's kind of all-encompassing for the most part. This one, it's definitely from below. When I pulled the rib roast off, when it reached the internal temperature I wanted to do the sear, I started rotating it over the hot coals on the reverse sear, and one side was done and the other one was nowhere near done. So just bear that in mind if you buy one of these. It's cooking from below. And before I drop that in place, that's what one of the tuning plates looks like. It's fashioned out of 1/4 inch plate steel, or steel plate rather, 6 inches wide. All three are the same. This pit does have 3 of them. Okay, so that's set up per manufacturer's recommendations. The first plate is right up against the deflection plate or the firewall there. Got a 1/4 of an inch gap in between the first and the second plate, and a 1/2 inch gap here. Again, I've already been here. This is where we started last year when we bought when I started using this pit. But nonetheless, I'm going to start from square one and start moving them out. Okay, it's 2 o'clock straight up. And probably time to feed it again. Yep. And again, just going with 2 more splits, roughly the same size as the ones we've been using. This one's a little on the smaller side again. Okay, so I think you're getting the idea here. Next time I feed this, I might mismanage the fire a little bit, let the coal bed die down, and just show you it's not the end of the world with this pit. And I could overbuild a fire and show you how to spill a little bit of heat. I don't think I'll bother with doing that because I've never had to spill heat with this pit. I've never overbuilt a fire to a point where I had to open things up. But were that to be the case, you do on this pit have the option. With a gloved hand, of course. These are welding gloves. Opening that up, and so if you've accidentally overbuilt your fire and you're getting too much heat in the heat chamber, you can open this up and let the fire burn down a little bit, and then close it up again. Now, something else on this pit, cracking the door certainly helps to get a little extra air to the fire and the coals. However, I do find on occasion that I'm better off closing the door and opening up the damper a little bit. It focuses the airflow a little more directly on the coal bed and the fire where you need it to be. In this case, it's taken off okay with the door cracked here. I'll let that go just a few more seconds and close it up, but again, I think you get the idea. Okay, so it's 2:06. Our splits are going just fine in there. It's probably a little difficult to see against the blue sky. The smoke is just a skosh cloudy, and that is typical of this pit. For as well as it draws, it's surprising that you do get a little bit of white to the smoke most of the time, and that is no problem at all. I've not had any issue with poor quality of product as a consequence of that. But this is what the smoke is going to look like, at least on my pit, typically throughout a cook. So my other smokers, thin blue smoke is the norm, just a little bit of cloud on this one. Again, it's a little hard to gauge because you really don't have a good dark background here. So it's if I have any question about how cloudy it's getting, I'll have to go inside the house and look out a window where this is framed against the hillside and the trees, so I have a darker background and better contrast. And this, again, by no means unacceptable, but just slightly cloudier than my other smokers. And again, absolutely no effect on the quality of the product. It's very good. Okay, so it's 2:25, and here's a good example. I've already actually had this open. Fire was starting to die down, or I noticed the temperatures rather on the pit starting to drop just a little bit, so I came out and checked this out. And these splits are burning down pretty quickly. They're a little on the small side, and I probably should have thrown a third one in, but I didn't. But this is a good example of what you can do when something like this occurs. You can throw in what I call a maintenance split. We're not quite ready to add wood to the fire yet. We're not down to coals or approaching coals, but we can throw one more split on there. and keep things perking along until we are ready to feed the pit again. So feed the firebox. Okay, so we're still on the first setting with the plates, and actually some very interesting temperatures here. We've got just over 200 in the front, 2 1/4 in the back, 2 1/4 in the center, 2 1/4 in the left rear, and about 230, 235 over here. So much different than what I'd had going on before. I don't know how much I've allowed the fire to die down a little bit intentionally, just so I can demonstrate that it's not a big deal on this cooker. So I'm going to leave the tuning plates where they're at for the time being. Yep, so here we are. I've had a couple of beers and fell asleep in the hammock and forgot about the cooker, and now your fire has died down. Very low coal bed here, obviously, so, but believe me, it's not the end of the world. In fact, it's not all that terribly low. I could have let that go even lower. But if it had gone much lower, I would probably take some smaller splits, the smallest you have available, and feed the fire, get it going again with some kindling with a couple of larger splits on top of that, just to show you how not a big deal this is. I'm just going to grab a couple of normal size splits here, and this is going to take off, believe it or not. So these probably aren't going to start burning very well leaving the door open, just because the coal bed is low enough and cool enough that they're not going to ignite very quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close the door here, and I'm going to open the damper all the way up, and they'll ignite a lot quicker. Again, this is going to direct the air a little more focused on the coal bed there. And there it goes, it's already taken off. Now, obviously, you wouldn't normally want to let your coal bed get that low, but we all make mistakes. Now, I'm just going to leave that damper open until I'm satisfied that those splits have lit well, and I'll probably need to, because the coal bed has gotten so low, at some point halfway between now and the time I would normally add some more splits, is throw on another maintenance split just to help build that coal bed back up a little bit. Okay, I changed my mind. I did go ahead and open this up a little bit. Got a 1/4 of an inch opening against the firewall, or the deflector plate there. 1/2 an inch between the next two plates, and an inch over here. Again, did this last year with unsatisfactory results. Today, for some reason, it's looking a lot better. We shall see. Okay, 3:25, and it's just a few minutes after we threw the splits on the dying coal bed here. Now, I can guarantee what I'm going to have to do in about 10 or 15 minutes, long before I'd normally add some more splits. I'll probably have to flip these over and also add another split, a maintenance split, just to keep the fire up and leave us with a significant coal bed. So, and I'll film that, but that's probably about it. There's not a whole lot more to get into after this. You can see that's due to the shallow, I shouldn't say shallow, but confined area underneath the coal grate in the bottom of the firebox there. The coals and ashes do pile up pretty quickly. So for a longer cook, again, that's something you're going to have to keep clear to keep airflow under the charcoal grate. So we'll check back on this here again in a few minutes. Okay, so we're not even as much later as I predicted we would be. The smoke's getting a little bit cloudy, so I can tell we need to do something about that. I'm just going to go ahead and flip these sticks. Kind of get those coals up underneath them to ensure combustion. I think rather than just a maintenance split, I'm going to put on a couple of small ones here, just to ensure the pit temperature doesn't drop. And while we're here, looking at this is a good reminder of something you can do, and this isn't going to be a problem here, I don't think. But if you do, and likewise, I thought about demonstrating this. If you throw a split in that's a little too large for it to thoroughly consume or be consumed by the fire, and it's kind of smoldering and giving you some fits, likewise, it's not the end of the world. This split would be way too large for this pit, and it would just sit there and smolder. What you can do, in addition to rotating or just flipping the split, is also rotate it end over end when you put it in there. It'll make sure you don't have a big chunk of wood right next to the vent just sitting there smoldering, producing a lot of dirty smoke. So, oh, that's going to take off just fine now. And there's one other item I have to address before I complete this video. So those are thoroughly consumed. We're back on track here. Everything's Jake. Again, not the end of the world if you let your coal bed get a little low. So I've got the damper opened up just to get those fully consumed, and we're about there. So I'm going to start closing that back down a little bit. Probably about there for the time being. The other thing I wanted to mention is, I mean, you know, this should be recreational, and barbecue is fun, and the results are extremely satisfying. But do not forget, and I can't overstress this, you are literally playing with fire here. So it's absolutely essential that you remain hydrated. And this is one of the ways I like to do it. I've been drinking this stuff for about 25 years now. Cave Creek chili beer. It's originally out of Cave Creek, Arizona. I think it's brewed by Tecate down in Mexico now, but good stuff. I also had one of these a little earlier. This is a Tommy Knocker green chili beer. This one doesn't actually have a chili in it like this one does. You can see, where's the chili? Not much of a chili in there anymore. Oh, there it is. It's floating. They usually sit in the bottom. This does not have a chili in it, and I don't care for it. It's not bad, but I don't care for it as much. This comes out of a brewery in New California. Anyway, I hope this was useful. I was about done with the barbecue videos when I got the request for the fire management and how long it takes the pit to come up to temperature. And I will go ahead and next time I use each of those pits, produce a video on fire management model, specific fire management for those pits. The only other video I had thought about doing was precipitated by a review I did on another smoker with an insulated firebox. And I'll post in the description below a link to a playlist that has all those videos if anybody's interested in those. So Don't know why they would be, but nonetheless, I'm getting sidetracked. One thing I noticed when I was using that cooker, I hadn't used it in a long time. I'd been using this and in another cooker chiefly. So when I use the smoker with the insulated firebox, the smoke profile is totally different. I'd gotten used to something completely different. So I thought I might do a side-by-side comparison of those two cookers, not comparing make and model, but just the quality of the product that they produce, particularly with an insulated firebox, because it is different. And I'm not sure I like it that much, to be honest with you. So anyway, and I have no idea when I'm going to do that, but keep an eye out, I guess, if you're interested in anything like that. So anyway, thanks for watching. Again, I hope you got something out of this, and no need to like or subscribe. This is strictly for anybody's benefit if they're interested. Have a dandy day. Update. It's 5:03. And I'm just about to knock off. I've adjusted the plates quite a ways out and moved them back to the best position I achieved today. Get 200 there, 2 1/4 in the back, just under 2 1/4 there, about 235, 240 there, and that was up around 275 a little while ago. It's back down to about 260 or so. So about a 60-degree differential there.